Okay, well, we got about 3 minutes until we officially begin. How's it going, Pete?
It's going all right, man.
All
It's
right.
going all right. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. We got a
That's good.
dump of snow here in
Yeah. Yeah.
Kamloops, which is not.
We were down to kind of bare pavement and,
Yeah.
not green grass per se, but I mean, you could see
There was
grassy
grass present.
fields and, that kind of thing. Hibernating grass, maybe, brown grass. Things were looking not bad. It looked kind of like early spring.
Yeah.
And now we're back in the throes of winter. So
And I'm sure it'll be gone by tomorrow.
that's right. Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
it's pretty wet and melty snow. It's going to pile up and, maybe we'll have some slush left tomorrow and
maybe.
that'll gradually go away. But yeah, I mean, we're in the pluses Celsius. I don't know, not sure for Fahrenheit listeners where we're at the 50s, 40s, something like that.
Yeah, what is it? Let's find that out.
Yeah.
So see.
We're definitely above 32, which is freezing point in Fahrenheit. So
what is the temperature here?
I don't know, a couple degrees Celsius.
A couple degrees, just a few.
So maybe it's like
yeah, it says 2 degrees.
High 30s, mid 30s.
Yeah, 35.6 in Fahrenheit.
Yeah. So I guess that's pretty cold still, but
yeah.
But we're above 32. That's what you need to know.
We are above 32.
Yeah. So yeah, had the kids out shoveling snow and
nice. That's what kids are for, right?
To the house. Yeah. So yeah, everyone getting ready for the Super Bowl. We're expecting a few visitors, so we're trying to keep the path to the house clear. And
well, yeah, and also make sure they can leave again. When I first parked, I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to leave if this keeps snowing.
We're going to get a children's crusade of kids to push your vehicle out.
It would be appropriate.
That's right. Yeah, it would fit today.
It would, yeah. Of course, I guess it's probably better than if I just not left the house at all today and then let all the snow pile up around.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, again, I don't work tomorrow, so I could have just waited.
Just wait it out.
That's what I usually do. I very rarely ever have to
actually shovel.
Every once in a while because I have to park on the street.
We got in trouble with the city. Actually, we got a bylaw complaint that our snow pile stuck out too far into the road.
The snow pile that from the road.
Well, so from our driveway, because we have both a driveway and a parking pad. We don't have a ton of room for the snow in between those two areas, and so it kind of piles up, and then it slowly kind of peaks out into the road. And so yeah, the city was like, it's too far into the road. So I don't know if a plow truck driver was like, nah, that's too far or something, because you're allowed to go into the road but not the main driving area of the road,
right?
And so we had a bylaw complaint against us.
Interesting. Yeah, I have to the people who live upstairs above me, because I have a basement suite, they need both sides of the driveway, so I have to park on the road, which is fine. I've only got one vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
But it does mean that sometimes when the snowplow goes by on the road, you get pretty heavily snowed in, and I'll ignore most of the stuff like on the side of the car as long as I can shovel out the front and back to make sure I can get out and back in again.
That's right. That's all. But
it does get frustrating when other people steal my spot the spot that I shovel out to make sure I can get in and out of, and then I have to drive around looking for another spot nearby that isn't shoveled out because nobody else is parking there. So
Kamloops is not really great in the neighborhoods for street parking.
Yeah,
there's not a lot of street parking available.
That is very true.
Mm-hmm.
You are correct. What are we doing? Hang on. I think I need to do. Yeah.
We'll cue up some music.
That's what I'm doing right now. So it's 1:31. We have a Captain Jimmy listening in.
That's me.
Glad to have you, Captain Jimmy.
I'm going to mute it, though, so it doesn't bleed into my microphone.
Yeah, do that. But stay in there so if we feel like we have an audience member.
Yeah. I like to listen to myself talk. It's it's what I like most.
As, many of us do. I'm saying don't do that.
Oh, like the show to send your support to the host.
Yeah, do it, man. Do it. Like your own show. Captain Jimmy liked the show.
Look at that.
We love it. And Captain Jimmy has a big old gold star next to his name right now.
Oh, well, that's good. I don't see that on my end, but nice.
Oh, yeah.
That means I'm a super fan.
It does mean you are a super fan, and we appreciate your support, Captain Jimmy. I would not be here without you, and that is very true.
Yeah, I should have bought you a coffee.
What am I trying to do? I'm looking for. I just want to make sure that
I think in tradition, we should play the outro music right now.
Is that our special live version of
New
doing it?
tradition to play to mix them up.
I just want to make sure that my output is going to there as well. Okay, so we should hear the music when it goes. Darn. You know what's weird? Never mind. Nobody cares. My name is Todd Sullivan.
I'm Peter Hammond.
And that's not how we begin this podcast.
No.
How we begin
Okay.
is I say, hi, you're listening to When Bad Things Happen to Good People, the podcast about censorship in the arts. Now I say, my name's Todd Sullivan. And then I say, my co-host is Peter Raman.
And I say, hello, because one hello isn't enough.
Welcome to our podcast. Today, we are going live to wrap up our look at Kurt Vonnegut Jr.'s Slaughterhouse 5. Or, you remember the German pronunciation of it?
Oh, no.
Schlachterhaus 5.
Schluchterhaus
Fifth.
Fifth, something like that. Or The Children's Crusade, A Duty Dance with Death.
Indeed.
That's a little.
That was weird and funky. Felt a little bit like Half Got Conspiracies music bleeding over there.
Yeah,
a little weird.
Funky, yeah. Maybe there's a conspiracy against us.
Maybe there is.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Good to be back. Good to be talking about this book. This book has been on my mind a lot the last couple of weeks since we read it. I've been thinking about it a lot, maybe partly because I did continue reading the graphic novel edition by Ryan North and Albert
Montes.
And it is a really, really good version of the book, I think. Obviously, the book is the book, and if you want to really experience the novel. But if you're someone who maybe doesn't read a lot, doesn't love the idea of a wall of text in front of you, or if you're someone who has read it before and wants a slightly different take on the story, I absolutely adored this adaptation, and some of the things that they were able to do in comic book form, a more visual form, was a really interesting way of telling the story.
Yeah, I think again, I haven't read it. I'm looking at it now, and I think just the structure of this story, as we talked about in some of our other episodes, being so non-linear, that the graphic novel format, I think, lends itself really well to that, right? Just the stark visual contrast of being in one place and jumping to another, and being able to kind of present that visually. I think is going to be pretty neat. So I'm anxious to kind of go through it and have a read through. It looks really cool. Todd showed me a few panels and things, and looks like a really neat version. And yeah, I mean, some of the meat of the book in terms of, the bombing and the war and, what that looks like, and them trudging through the snow and, that kind of stuff to present it visually, I think will be kind of a really neat way to get into the story and kind of from a different angle. Right.
There's a couple of 2-page spreads where, like, when they first arrive at Dresden and they see Dresden for the first time, there's a big 2-page spread of the city,
a tableau, if you will.
And there's actually some sort of cut-ins of, like, Billy Pilgrim sort of noticing this statue or that statue, and it showcases them. And then after the bombing, when they all leave the slaughterhouse, there's another 2-page spread of what's left of it. And that sort of, it felt very much like it was meant to be from the same angle, the same part of the city, and it's just rubble now. And so those 2 pages, I think, visually form a really good contrast of, like, before and after, and just how much devastation there was. I also wanted to mention too, at the start here, as I was reading and finishing the graphic novel the other night, I noticed that today we are just 2 days shy of the 79th anniversary of the bombing of Dresden.
Oh, wow.
On February 13th, 1945.
I mean, no, we planned it that way.
We absolutely planned it that way. This just shows how far ahead we think, which you'll know when we talk about our next book and why we're not going to actually be covering it during Black History Month.
Right month.
But we had the best of intentions.
Yeah, we tried pretty hard, guys. We tried pretty hard.
But we'll get to that later.
timing is not our strong suit.
unless it's entirely by
Yeah,
accident,
that's right. Yeah.
and then woohoo,
Yeah, then it works out.
then it
Yeah.
works out. Um, uh, I really I like this book a lot more than I think I did.
Okay.
I was a little middling on it when we finished, and the more I thought about it, the more, and I think part of what I struggle with just as a human being is I feel like whatever my favorite book of somebody's is should also be whatever I think their best book is.
Hmm.
And I don't think this is my favorite Kurt Vonnegut novel, but I do think in retrospect that it is probably his best.
I mean, it's certainly most well known, right?
Yeah, just everything about it is so perfect in my mind.
Yeah. It's really well written, right? I mean, just the effortless style
Yeah,
of, being humorless but also tackling a really difficult
yeah.
subject, and bringing in sci-fi elements and fantasy, but kind of still having it grounded in the real world and real things that happen.
But also
It's tough. That's tough to do,
it is,
you know.
but also the way that he was able to use the Tralfamadorians not just as like here's a little wacky sci-fi stuff on the
Hmm.
side, but really it's about how to explain the structure of the novel. It's about how to explain how to read the novel, how to understand the novel. Because really, Slaughterhouse-Five is an example of a human attempting Tralfamadorian type
That's right. Yeah.
literature, where it's all sort of all
So
there at
all at
once.
once coming at you from all different
Um,
sides. Yeah.
and I don't think in my first reading of it I got that depth of it.
Because
Um,
yeah, like I mean, there's a few spots in the book where it is kind of not so much exposition per se, but there are some kind of little snippets of, well, okay, here's how we do it, and the differences, right, between Treflamadorians and humans,
yeah,
and that where it stands out a little bit is okay, especially when they explain the Tralfamadorian books,
yeah,
right? That's where you kind of go, okay, light bulb a little bit. But
yeah.
I think we both read this when we were really young, and I can hardly even remember reading it the first time around, but I think, maybe if you're younger, right, you're maybe not connecting all those dots, right, the bigger picture with the kind of micro kind of explanations, and yeah, it takes a little bit of perspective maybe as you get older to go,
I
okay.
find too for me, I'm learning, especially from this podcast, that I think I understand a book better if I've had the opportunity to talk about it and sort of sound out.
Hmm.
Like for me, when I finish reading a book, I tend to just sort of close it and move on. I'm also a very kind of literal thinker. So unless I force myself, I maybe don't look into subtext or metaphor, things like that.
Yeah, unless it kind of hits you in the face. I
Yeah.
think I fall into that camp as well, where it has to be a little more overt if it's symbolism or things like that. At the odd time, I'll kind of catch it,
Yeah, for sure.
because it's like it's stuff that's not obvious, but I'll catch it and go, oh, hey, just kind of. But otherwise, yeah, I kind of read through it and more about the plot, and okay, am I even getting the action of
Right.
what's going on here? Uh, and not really focusing on, okay, what is the subtext, and I mean, this is a book that has a great deal of subtext and kind of symbolism in it. So yeah, if you read it just as a more quote unquote sci-fi fantasy novel, then you are missing a lot of that. So, and I think maybe that's how I looked at it when I was younger,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it didn't really have that big of an impact on me, I think, and reading it now, and I think having the opportunity to discuss it with you, Todd, we both look at things a little bit
Mhm.
differently. We focus on a few, different areas
Yep.
sometimes. And I think that does help bring stuff out, or get us to think in a non-linear fashion a little bit more about each book that we read. So glad to be doing this with you, man.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, because I think looking back on other books that I've covered on this podcast, both with you and with Oren before that, and with the other co-hosts I've had in the past, um, it does feel like there's been a lot of books that I've been able to sort of zoom in on more because of the conversation, and I can see the appeal of people getting together for book clubs, and they read something and
Yeah,
then they talk about it together. And so I guess this is sort of like our little band book
yeah,
club that
that's right.
hopefully
Yeah,
you know
and
you guys
hopefully.
can join in on as well.
Exactly. Hopefully, people listening at home, if they've read it or are thinking about reading, whatever we're covering, they get the chance to be kind of part of that discussion,
Mhm.
right? And these live episodes are a great chance for that, or to take us down a peg or
Yeah,
whatever,
whatever.
whatever you want to
You
do,
want to
I
tell us
guess.
our assessment is bullshit?
Yeah,
Yeah, go
that's
for
right.
it. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can't be right about everything, or maybe even most things. Who knows?
We can only hope.
Yeah.
Do it or
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think you kind of broach the subject well in the sense that just reading it on the face of it, right? It can be hard to access in a sense, right? I mean, it's not a linear book; it jumps all over the
yeah.
place. It's tough. We talked about before how tough the timeline is to even
Oh god, it's
figure
next to
out.
impossible. Yeah.
People have tried, and there seems to still be errors and
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
when you look at some of the timeline stuff that's out there online. So it can be difficult to wrap your head around it, especially as a linear thinker, going, okay, like
Yeah.
what actually happened in what order? I get that he's flashing back and forth, but if I try and piece together his life and when things actually happen, that challenge, I think, difficult to access the story, I think, in the way that Vonnegut maybe wants, right? Is you to look at the horrors of war and the conflicting emotions and that kind of stuff. Even though Billy's not a very emotional guy,
Yeah.
and so when you get bogged down in kind of where are we in the plot and what's happening, it can make it, I think, difficult to access. But once you get past that, and again discussing it and going through like, oh yeah, and he flipped back here, and then that, I think, that discussion can help you really get in more in depth into the material, and into that subtext
Yeah.
that we're
Yeah.
talking about. And I think then it gets a lot easier to access. There's a lot of humor in this
There's a
book,
lot of humor.
right? There's a
Kurt
lot
is
of,
a very funny
yeah,
writer.
a lot of tongue in cheek stuff, a lot of like satirical stuff, a lot of taking real world scenarios and just really amplifying the humor in it.
I mean, the
Uh,
endless usage of "so it goes"
yeah,
anytime
it's like a little
anything
inside joke
lives
for
or
everyone
dies. Like
who's in the book. Yeah.
if a dog dies, it's
Yeah.
like "so it goes." It's just it's so
I remember there was and I didn't highlight it, but there is a point somewhere in the book in the later chapters where something dies and he doesn't say so it
oh
goes.
interesting.
There was one, and I should have highlighted it because it really stood out for me because I was like, wait a minute, something died and there's no so it goes line.
Yeah, you should have
I
because I
should have,
almost feel
yeah.
like that's worth discussing whether or not it was an intentional choice. Like,
Yeah.
is there a reason that
I
this was?
I don't remember it as being significant per se as far
Mhm.
as the actual kind of death or anything like that, but I remember it. I can't. Maybe it was. No, it wasn't the horses at the end, but it was near the end of the book, and it really stood out to me. And I probably should have highlighted, and maybe we should have talked about it. But we're focusing on other things.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean those tropes and insights. There is stuff that kind of repeats, and just the situations that he gets into, right? That real world situation and finding the humor in it. When you get into that, it really, I
yeah.
think, a lot on that kind of stuff.
And a timeline, and this is probably not super surprising, but I found the timeline a lot easier to follow in the graphic novel because there's a lot you can get more cues from the visuals, right? You can see
Yeah.
that this is an older looking Billy Pilgrim, so you can sort of ground that timeline. They also use coloring sometimes to show the different periods of time. Like I think
Like
the
like a
war
whiter contrast
the
versus.
war just tends to be a lot more darker and purple.
Okay.
So I think some of the earlier life or later life is like more orange, and
So
so
not only do you get the verbal cue, but the visual
the
cue. Hey,
visual,
we
yeah.
and we're in a different
Same with the
time.
clothing as well. You can
Yeah,
immediately tell when he's wearing,
yeah,
his ill-fitting army fatigues, or
that's right.
he's wearing his
Oh man, I can't wait to see his little tiny jacket in this
yeah,
graphic novel.
right.
It's gonna be neat.
Um, and I also was thinking about, one thing we talked about last episode was about the death of the teapot guy. Can't think of his name right
Edgar
now.
Derby, Darby,
Darby.
Darby.
That like it's been talked about from the beginning of the novel, and then like it's practically we don't even hear it till the very end, and then it's just kind of an aside.
Yeah, I mean,
It was almost
there's
like,
two or three sentences,
oh,
right?
right.
That, yeah,
I haven't wrapped this up yet. We'll just
yeah,
quickly do that. But
exactly.
I again, the more I think about that, the more I think that that fits entirely with the message of the book, which is sort of that like every moment in a person's life is kind of equally relevant, equally,
Mhm.
so why do we treat one with any more or less value than another? So, and again, that's a bit like, the moment that Darby dies versus that moment that Billy Pilgrim is standing there and the bird goes pooty wheat.
Yeah.
We have one is a moment of beauty, one is a moment of tragedy, but they're both ultimately equal. So it
Yeah.
goes.
So it goes.
Um, and again, I think the repetition of the "so it goes" helps deliver that message as well.
Yeah, yeah, tying that to each death, right, really, I think, brings forward that, yeah, there's not one that's more important or less important, they're just all moments. The Tralfamadorian, explanation as well about, yeah, it's all just a moment. Why is one moment, more
Yeah,
valuable than
yeah,
another?
and they're
It's
not.
just it's a series of moments. We're gonna look at them all, and,
Yeah,
they can move back and forth through them, and so can Billy, I guess, in a sense,
yeah.
but, yeah, I mean, for us linear folk, we maybe assign more importance to stuff in the past, because it's things that maybe shape us more, or we can just remember it more clearly, or something like that.
But we can also choose
Yeah,
what parts we decide to focus on, and what parts we decide
that's
to,
right.
you know, slide back to, I guess, as it were,
Yeah, as
as
far
we
as
remember. And
reminiscing,
yeah,
right? Yeah. But yeah, I think the assigning importance, to a specific event, I guess if you're thinking about how it maybe affects you, as a person, right? Certain events may have more of an impact on you in terms of your emotional growth, or stunting, or whatever the effect was, and so you maybe assign more importance in that sense. But you know, taking that step back and looking at Billy's life, or the war, or what have you, certainly the series of moments, there's not really any that's more or less,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
yeah, that I think gets driven home by that build up, and then lack of
yeah,
really any powerful follow through
yeah.
on the Edgar Derby, right? Three sentences, I think it was,
Exactly,
right? Yeah.
exactly. And I think that's sort of what where I land on this not being my favorite Vonnegut book is it's almost a little bit too subtle for me.
Hmm.
Some of his other stuff that I've read seems to be a little bit wilder, a little bit more swinging for fences with some of the concepts, and not necessarily sci-fi concepts, but just sort of lyric concepts, and just a little bit crazier,
Hmm.
which I appreciated. And this is just it's so again, like I think it's so perfectly crafted in a way to be so very simple, elegant, um, but just a little bit too much so for me. You
Yeah,
know?
I agree that there is a level of understatement.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as there's kind of humor and kind of neat moments throughout, I think Billy Pilgrim himself as a character, not really having much in the way of any grand emotions, or he kind of is fairly lackadaisical, right? He doesn't ever have any passion, really, right? I mean, we don't really see him passionate about anything throughout the book, right? So I think that prevents there being any grand swings, or anything where you as a reader can align your passions, and I think that adds to the understatement of it, right? So you have events that are built up, and then they go by like a ship in the night, uh but then also your lead character doesn't display much passion one way or the other, right? So it definitely lends kind of that a very even keel to the whole book, right?
I think part of that is because of the nature of the story. Billy doesn't really live life as much as life happens to him,
Hmm. Hmm.
because he can't really change anything because in that sense everything has already happened and he's just running through it again and again and
That's right.
again.
Yeah, he's a
Um,
passive observer, right, in
yeah,
in his own life.
yeah.
I think
Which
do they say that? Does he say that, or maybe we
I
just
don't,
commented
I
on that?
don't think it is ever explicitly stated, and there's a few points where it's almost implied
Hmm.
that he could. Like, there's a point where he's on the plane that crashes, and it says something about how, he knew that it was going to crash, but he didn't bother to say anything because, like, he didn't want to like
Alarm
alarm
anyone. Yeah.
anyone, and it was going to happen anyway.
Yeah,
And so there is that implication that in the back of Billy's mind, he maybe could do it differently, but like, what's the point? Because it's not going to change anything.
that's right. Yeah.
It's very much the same that when he was waiting for the Tralfamadorians to come down the first
Yeah, the
time,
looking up or
and
not
he's
looking
not
up,
looking
and
up or not looking up, and it's I think one half because when it happened, and you have to wonder too, and this is probably getting a little bit too literal into how Billy. I guess we had to discuss that there was a point where he became unstuck in time for the first time.
Mhm.
Um, so maybe like So everything up to let's say he first becomes unstuck in the war, like in his early 20s.
Well, I think what he was 17 or 18, I
Okay,
think,
fine,
right? Yeah,
17,
yeah.
18. And then he fast forwards to like middle age, say.
Mhm,
That's technically the first time he's experienced that middle age.
mhm. So when he does get there in a linear sense, he may have experienced
Well, I
it
mean, he
several
never
times.
really gets there in a linear sense, right? I mean, maybe. Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah, I mean, I
I
guess
think we're trying to
we're
like
we're gonna
force
start we're gonna
we're
start
gonna force the
explaining.
reality on this piece of fiction that doesn't
Yeah,
really want it.
we're gonna fit in all these time jump rules
Yeah,
around this, but
it doesn't really
yeah.
work.
Well, and because I mean, is he literally jumping time, or is his consciousness merely observing, right, or shifting, right? Like he's not physically jumping time,
No, not
right?
physically.
It's just consciousness moving back and forth. So yeah, there's all sorts of some discussion around this that are less relevant
Well,
to
I think,
what.
yeah, I mean, it's very much like if you look at the way the Tralfamadorians see the stars as like the spaghettis and stuff,
Mhm.
and then you imagine the star just being in any particular one of those moments, and that's what Billy is doing, is he's just being in those different
Yeah,
moments,
he's just jumping
and that,
around. Yeah,
in a
he's
sense,
going up and down the string. Yeah,
yeah, and in a
yeah.
sense, even if I haven't died yet, but somewhere down in the future, I'm going to die. It's going to happen in a specific way,
Hmm.
and no
So it goes.
matter so it goes. And even though I'm not there now, I will be there, eventually, and then I could be there, but then I could just as easily come back
Yeah,
here. And it's about perspective. It's about where our, I guess, our consciousness or our awareness or our perception is within the timeline,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I see
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know what the point of that was, but
Well, I mean, yeah, we're delving into the whole, like the whole Tralfamadorian kind of
well, and
experience
also,
of
yeah, why
time,
it is
right?
that Billy seems to be so passive.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, I guess if because he doesn't seem to control it either,
no,
right? So I guess in if you can't control
which is what
that.
happened to Loki in Loki season 2 as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, especially at the start.
Yeah.
I mean, he learned to
He did
control it,
learn. Maybe
but
maybe if Billy Pilgrim hadn't been assassinated by that guy, he would have eventually
yeah,
figured it out.
exactly. Or maybe if he was less dispassionate about life,
Maybe,
maybe.
maybe that's the issue.
Yeah,
Be more passionate about your life, and you'll be
that's
able to
right.
control your
Yeah.
time slips.
Yeah.
Heard it here
But
first.
I mean, I think if he tried and he couldn't control it, right? I mean, you get to that acceptance phase, right? Maybe he was angry at first, or what are the five stages of
Of grief or whatever. Yeah,
yeah. So he gets to acceptance at the end, and that in a sense
that's
would
a good
make
point
him
too.
a lot
Yeah.
more passive because he can't do anything about it. He's going to jump through time. He just has
Well,
to
shit.
see
That's
what
the whole.
happens,
That's
right?
on the
Yeah.
the necklace. The God grant me the serenity to
Yeah, that's
accept and
right.
change
Yeah,
things I
yeah.
cannot change. Blah, 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 blah,
That's
blah.
right. We'll look up that picture again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that one's
Yeah.
it's in the graphic novel too, with like,
Oh, is it?
yeah,
Okay.
a better
Yeah.
drawn pair of tits on it.
There you go. Yeah.
And yeah, the messaging that, like, ultimately when someone dies, they're dead at that moment.
That's right.
But there's all these moments before
And they continue to
that
exist.
they're still
Yeah.
alive. And it's that message of, I remember reading a couple of years ago, maybe more than a couple now, but this idea that getting old is a luxury. We not everybody gets the opportunity to do it.
Hmm.
And if you are one that is able to, it's kind of a gift, right?
Right.
Um, but it's not guaranteed. I don't know what my point is. I don't know. I'm trying to say something profound about life and death.
Yeah. I mean, you certainly would have a lot more moments on your spaghetti strand where you're not unalive.
Existence rather than
Yeah.
non-existence is generally preferred, not universally.
Not universally, but generally.
But
Yeah.
it is nice to remember that somebody who did exist existed, and not forget them, not just remember that in some level, in some way,
Mhm.
they are still there, whether in the past, whether in your heart, whether in your memory. They're still real. They lived. They live on. Kind of.
That's right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Those moments are always there.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you, Tralfamadorians, for explaining that to us.
Yes. And I think, yeah, I mean, probably this was published in what,
60
1967, I think.
something.
Um, and I think that's maybe part of it too, is that concept of time being immutable, and sort of everything that happens.
Well, the copyright's 1960.
uh, it was maybe pretty new at that point in time, at least for the general public consciousness. So
Mhm.
you kind of have to take their hand and ease them into it a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that again, that's what the Tralfamadorians were for, was to sort of, it was a guide to how to read this book without
Putting
putting a
explicit
chapter at the
directions, yeah.
beginning saying how to read this book.
I mean, considering there's a whole chapter at the beginning of the book that kind of explained the author's take on the book, I mean, it wouldn't have been a stretch to include more of that,
I
but,
guess.
yeah, no,
But I mean, even the way that he did that at the beginning is pretty different. Like
Mhm.
we discussed that, like that first chapter in a lot of books would have been a foreword
Yeah,
or something like that. It wouldn't
yeah.
be chapter one
And then also ending the book in that same
in that same
way,
way.
right?
Well, that, I mean, given that it started that way, that it
Yeah.
ends that way too.
But I mean, you don't get afterwards a lot in books, right? It's mainly forwards. So,
That is true.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, even the way that Kurt, inserted himself into the book
Yeah.
a handful
Yeah.
of times,
Yeah. Yeah. 2 or
um,
3 times,
two or
just
three times.
pops up and like, yeah, I was there.
And again, it does make me wonder what percentage of the things that Billy Pilgrim experienced or went through were also things that Kurt went through. I mean, imagine a lot of it was the same because Kurt was,
Yeah.
was there for a lot of it. So Kurt probably spent some time spooning the syrup. Um, I can't think of, well, Kurt was definitely there shitting his guts out
That's right.
after the,
Yeah.
the rich
He was
meal.
probably in the next slaughterhouse. I don't know what,
Slaughterhouse Six.
yeah.
um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I'm just rambling.
Well, I mean, I think we started down this whole path just asking like thoughts on the book,
Yeah.
right? And clearly there's a lot to unpack in the book from all sorts of different ways, right? Like we've got this whole thing about time, about existence, moments, and linear versus nonlinear. We've got a lot to unpack about the war,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Brutality of war, and sending kids to into war. We've got a whole bunch of comedy. We've got the how do people talk in real life versus in a book, and we've got all sorts of things happening here that taken as a whole, like it's actually, I know we just talked about how kind of subtle and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
healed it is, but I mean, there's a lot going on in this book that it can be tough to focus on one particular thing
Yeah.
as and so yeah, we can kind of get to rambling a little bit about all the different kind of because a lot of it's really neat
Yeah.
and really well done. I mean, he's such an interesting writer that this time jumping and the different first chapter and all of that stuff just feels very natural
Mhm.
when you read it,
Yeah.
right? You don't read it and go, "Oh man, I don't know what he's talking about." Like
Yeah.
you're right in it, kind of immediately, right? So I think trying to summarize in any really brief kind of,
Even though
uh,
it's a very short book,
yeah, it's not a long book, but a lot
a
happens in
lot
it,
does happen.
and it's tough to kind of get your thoughts in order, I think, because are we talking about time jumping, are we talking about consciousness, or how we experience life, are we talking about war, are we talking there's so many different things here in this book, and it's all done so in such a neat way and such a fun to read way,
Yeah. Yeah.
that yeah, it's tough to pick one thing.
There's another sort of scene in relation to the war I kind of wanted to mention that I thought about after, because again, I read it again last night in the graphic novel, and I thought it was interesting. It's this moment when Billy, he is in the hospital. I think it's after his plane crash. He's starting to recover, and he's got the guy in the bed next to him who's doing a book on the
The
war.
Harvard guy,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Billy starts, acknowledging that he was at Dresden, and then the guy's like, "No, this guy's got echolalia." And
Yeah.
then they test Billy for echolalia, and he doesn't have it. And then Billy starts talking to him again. And at a certain point, the other guy finally acknowledges that Billy was at Dresden. They have this sort of conversation about it, and the military guy is like, they had to do it, right? Speaking of the
Yeah, I think
bombing,
we talked a little bit about that in the
and Billy
episode.
says, "I know." And what's interesting about that is, I think almost certainly the military guy's perspective is they had to do it from a strategic perspective. Like that's his argument. Like this is how we started to
But
win the
Billy's
war.
saying, "I know because these
Because
moments are always here." Yeah.
exactly. And
They're not talking about the same thing
they're
even though
not
they're in the
talking
same
about the same
conversation.
thing.
Yeah, for
And it
sure.
makes me wonder though, it's in a way it feels really futile because, on the one hand, it feels like we should be saying, okay, but could there not have been a better way for them to have achieved that? We talk about when we talk about war, should we not be saying is there a way that we can reduce the wars rather than saying the wars will happen that will happen, which seems to be kind of what Billy is saying as well. And it could be that that Vonnegut did feel that kind of futility, that the wars that will happen, and no matter how much, I don't know. This probably would have been written. Um, well, I think other references to Viet. There are references to Vietnam.
I think so. Yeah.
Um,
I
so
mean, 63, right, is when it
yeah,
was published. It
exactly.
would have been during that
Um,
time. So you had Korea and then into
yeah.
Vietnam, right? Yeah.
So there is that feeling of war being perhaps inevitable, and you
Hmm.
might as well hand it so it goes to every war that comes along.
Yeah.
And whether that's true or not, I guess I could definitely imagine someone who went through the bombing of Dresden like Vonnegut did, feeling and then seeing more war following that, following this supposed war to end all wars.
Well, I think it's tough to reconcile that there are alternatives to war
Hmm.
with the Tralfamadorian kind of
Well, yeah,
expression of moments in the
yeah,
book, right?
yeah,
So, yeah, I think certainly that was probably his thinking of there. It's inevitable,
yeah,
right? There's no way to lessen the impact, or it's the I know, yeah, I know.
yeah, yeah,
Billy just said. I think he
yeah,
says I know about 4 times
yeah,
in that
yeah, yeah, yeah,
conversation.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Um, any other, you got any other scenes that stick out to you immediately, or
I mean, at the end of the book, just the kind of going around what he calls the moonscape of
yeah,
the rubble of Dresden, and I think we talked a little bit about this before, but how just he survived this incredible tragedy, the destruction of an entire city, and he's I'm not sure on the timeline as far as how long they stay in the kind of prison inn, but eventually the war ends, and he has the happiest moment of his life
yeah,
hanging out in the back of a wagon in the ruined city while his friends are going to search the rubble. He's just enjoying the sunshine and kind of being on his own and ostensibly not time jumping for a little while.
yeah,
And this is the happiest moment of his life, and he's literally in the heart of this massive tragedy, right? In the rubble, the horses are in bad shape, the wagon is, in bad shape, and he's having the best moment of his life. And, for me, that kind of stood out a little bit as far as kind of hammering home some of the moments are moments, and, no one's more important or less important. But that one really stood out to me of, our dispassionate kind of character that doesn't really show a lot of emotion one way or another. Um, and it doesn't explain, like, there's no explanation of to why exactly this is the happiest moment of his life versus any others. But that one kind of stood out to me as being a real juxtaposition of Billy's super happy, and we're in the middle of this you know rubble of a city surrounded by dead people that have been essentially napalmed
yeah,
underground to not smell, and all this kind of reminders of tragedy everywhere you look. I'm sure in the graphic novel it's quite the picture.
yeah.
And he's sitting there, with a big smile on his face, living and enjoying life.
I
And
mean, yeah, I mean, some of it I imagine is just the contrast to where he was the day before.
mhm,
And this morning they woke up and the doors to the slaughterhouse or whatever were open. I guess it's not the slaughterhouse anymore. They're staying at a
they're staying at
they're at a
the inn.
barn or whatever. Yeah, in the end. But the war was over.
Mhm,
They were free. The sun is out. It's warm on his face.
yeah.
The first time that he's experienced freedom for probably quite some time. And yeah, again, it's that reminder that all moments are just moments, and any given one is as likely to be the best one that you're in as not. Whether you know, you look at like his, some of his anniversary party. There were some bad moments there,
Mhm,
but it was his anniversary party. It should have been a great time. Whereas this moment in the war, it's the middle of the war, and yet he's thinking it's maybe the best moment of his life.
yeah.
Um, all moments are, yeah, it's just as likely to be good or bad.
Yeah, I get the potentiality, I guess, of any particular moment to be happy or sad or
Yeah,
good or bad or what have you is equal amongst all moments. Yeah, I mean, that one stood out for me. Some of the Kilgore Trout stuff, right? When he
yeah,
when he
yeah,
meets Kilgore Trout, there's a lot of humor in that. Even when we first hear about him through the other convalescing patient, and I forget his name off the top of my head. When he's in his mental breakdown hospital.
Yep.
Like some of that is, some of the real humor in the book. When he goes and visits the front bookstore, or the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the sleazy bookstore, off of Times Square. It's the Kilgore books in there, but it gets kind of sucked into the whole, sleazy, and they think he's kind of sleazy just because he kind of checks it out
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and recognizes Montana or
Yeah.
whatever, and lots of kind of neat humor in that kind of stuff, and some of those moments again, not any equal or not any more important or less important, but yeah, some of that stuff was kind of neat. Seeing that some of those parts of Billy's life, because the first part of the book, I think, is a lot more focused on the war and kind of when he's a bit older,
Yeah.
and we hear about certain moments, the plane crash and some of that stuff earlier in the book, but we don't get a sense of some of that until much later in the book. So it's kind of neat to see some of that kind of come together, and finding the humor in it as well.
Yeah. I wanted to mention too about Kilgore Trout. I mentioned that he was
In other
somewhat, well,
books,
but
right?
also somewhat based on an actual writer. I couldn't think of the name, and the writer is Theodore Sturgeon.
Okay, yeah,
Sturgeon
sure,
to
that tracks.
Trout. Sturgeon was Vonnegut's colleague in the genre of science fiction. I'm reading this from Wikipedia. Vonnegut was amused by the notion of a person with the name of a fish, and hence substituted Trout for Sturgeon. And Vonnegut did later confirm this after Sturgeon's death. He admitted that that was. And I think Sturgeon
I mean, were people really all that confused?
probably not. But I think just because maybe there was some concern because he's not always painted as he's not a very well known writer. He's not a very good writer according
Yeah,
to everybody. You
that's
know,
true. He doesn't even think of himself as a writer.
Elliot Rosewater is like his writing sucks, but his ideas are amazing.
Yeah,
I mean, we can't trust Elliot Rosewater either because he writes like a 14-year-old boy,
that's
according to
right.
Kilgore
Yeah.
Trout. I'm just trying
But
to
even
find.
when they first meet and he's like, "Hey, are you that writer?" And he doesn't even know. He's like, "Oh, wait, yeah, I guess I am
Yeah,
a
right.
writer."
Yeah,
He doesn't think of
he's never
himself,
been recognized
yeah,
before
as a writer.
as a
Yeah.
writer. Yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you know, what was his name? Theodore Sturgeon?
Theodore Sturgeon. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a name that jumps to my mind as somebody I've ever heard of. So, maybe there's more parallels there than
The apparently Galapagos by Kurt Vonnegut is narrated by Leon Trotsky Trout, the son and only child of Kilgore Trout.
Hmm,
Leon
interesting.
ran away at the age of 16, ashamed of his father, and never had any contact with him thereafter until his death when Kilgore appeared at the door of the Blue Tunnel that leads to the afterlife. Spoiler alert, I guess. In Jailbird, Kilgore Trout is revealed to be the only lifer in the federal minimum security adult correctional facility near Finlander Air Force Base. Okay.
Interesting.
Breakfast of Champions, Kilgore Trout has part of his right ring finger bitten off by the book's other main character, Dwayne Hoover, when Kilgore attends an arts festival in the Midwest. Vonnegut revised Trout's biography on several occasions. Oh, interesting. He's got an inconsistent biography and has apparently written over 117 novels and over 2,000 short stories. He's usually
Wow.
described as an unappreciated science fiction writer whose works are used only as filler material in pornographic magazines. However, he does have at least three fans. Elliot Rosewater and Billy Pilgrim, both Vonnegut characters, have a near complete collection of Trout's work, or I've read most of his work. In Galapagos, Leon Trotsky Trout goes on leave in Thailand and meets an unnamed Swedish doctor who is a fan of Kilgore Trout. This doctor helps Leon desert the U.S. Marine Corps and defect to Sweden, where he receives political asylum as a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War.
Hmm,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, an interesting character for sure. And reading the book earlier, like at least the first half, I couldn't remember Trout. Like the name sounded familiar, but I was not remembering that we were going to get to meet him as an actual character later
Right,
in the
right, right,
book,
right.
right? So that was, definitely got some enjoyment out of that
I'd forgotten that
when he
too.
shows up.
I'd forgotten that too. I felt like him popping up in Breakfast of Champions was maybe the first time he appeared, but
Mhm.
no, he appears the same book that he's first mentioned in.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
he's quite the interesting character. How about any other thoughts from you, Todd, on the book?
Not probably nothing I can think of right now, and maybe I should have jotted down things that I was thinking about over the last few days. But I feel like I've covered most of what's been on my mind.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I mean, maybe let's get to the banning of the book.
yeah,
Right. So, is banned for some of the language, the sexuality, that kind of thing. I
yeah.
mean, we talked a little bit before about it is not a sexy book, and then later on we see
No,
a hand drawn picture of tits, but like there's certainly nothing. And I guess it's tough for us to maybe go back to the 60s and go, what was it like? But as far as things that we know, that was kind of, we the 60s were a time of free love, and there's a lot of movements happening in terms of sexuality, and things happening. So a picture of some cleavage and a
not
few.
even a particularly well drawn picture of
No,
cleavage.
and, like, some really unsexy kind of descriptions of things, with nothing really, certainly not titillating,
No,
and
not remotely.
not really slangy or,
You know,
um, kind of done in an obscene way at
mostly
all.
ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
this moment of like, oh, by the way, Billy Pilgrim has an enormous wang.
Yeah,
You
very
never know who's gonna get one.
it's comical,
Yeah.
there's certainly nothing, um over the top or done to really be grotesque around the sexual pieces. I mean, certainly there's some bad language, but you're dealing with soldiers in the war, right? Which was, I know, kind of one of the things around the book, and going, well, hey, you're dealing with a subject where this is how people talked, right?
Yeah, and again, violence was another reason that's been
Hmm.
banned. And again, I don't see how you can properly discuss war without including violence,
Yeah,
without like what is the purpose of sanitizing a conversation about war?
yeah,
War is inherently violent.
yeah. And I mean, there's not a ton of violence in the book, really.
No, no,
Like,
and what is? I mean, I guess you could argue that it might trivialize death by giving that whole
was that one
"so
of the
it
complaints
goes."
though?
I don't know,
I don't think
not that
so.
I've seen
Yeah.
specifically, but I could see that being an argument.
Well, I mean, it is kind of one of the points of the book, I guess, right? In terms of saying that, there's not one thing that's as far as moments go, or life or death, right? That is different or worth more or less than anything else, and that we exist.
Yeah.
The moments that we did exist will always exist, and so it goes, right? Um, yeah, I don't know as far as kind of the that being a reason for banning it, but certainly the things that were said at the time, if we look at this book in 2020, well, I guess we're 2024 now,
Yeah.
in the light of this day and age, there's nothing in here that would ever kind of get this book banned now.
Yeah, I don't think
I
so.
don't think
I
so,
don't
right?
think there's anything in here that would be of any sort of offense to
I
anyone,
mean, I
like,
say that, but there's people in the southern states that are
oh, yeah.
gonna
Yeah, but
ban anything, but
I would argue that this is fine for, junior high school and up to
yeah,
be part of the curriculum even, like, this is
yeah.
I mean, I don't know that this is maybe, if it yeah, I don't know whether I would say that this would be a great example of how to read about the war or learn about the war. I feel like it's a bigger picture story than that.
Yeah, I mean, it
Um,
focuses on one aspect of the war,
yeah.
really, and the time jumping and then that kind of stuff. Maybe takes some focus away from the war itself. Um, but I guess
It feels more like a book that's attempting to figure out and understand existence as a whole rather than just the
just
nature
specifically
to commit
war. Yeah,
war.
yeah,
Something like Art Spiegelman's Mouse, for example, that we've done on the podcast before, I think might be a better entry level book for somebody who's trying to understand get a better idea of
like the
um, the
complexities of war.
complexities of war and just how ugly the World War II
Yeah,
was.
yeah, and as an anti-war novel, maybe, I mean, that's something that's always talked about, is how great of an anti-war novel this is. Some of the "So It Goes," I think, maybe does mute that a little bit, right? The existence, and the moments not being necessarily worth more or less, the inevitability of war, that kind of thing, maybe mutes some of that a little bit, for me. I mean, you
But
know
then again, I mean, I guess the counter to that is to question like how much of it is an anti-war novel, and how much of it is maybe an acknowledgement that war is as inevitable as anything else.
Mhm.
you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Which I think makes it less anti-war, I
Yeah.
think, altogether. So, but that's certainly one of the things when you hear about this book or people talk about this book, is oh, hey, it's an anti-war book, and I think it's certainly more than that, and also think the anti-war bent to it is maybe not quite as pressing, certainly today, right? Looking at this
Yeah.
book as a whole,
Yeah.
you see a lot more kind of humor, and there's certainly a sci-fi aspect, and there's all this other stuff, that maybe the anti-war message is maybe not as prevalent,
Yeah.
really, right?
Yeah.
Especially countered with the kind of inevitability of war. Looks like we have a couple folks in the room with us now. A
We
tender nugget
did. I
and
think they might be gone
Richardson
now,
Vito.
but
Oh,
if you are still in the room, give us a call if you want to, join the chat about Slaughterhouse-Five, about banned books in general. Um, Preferably those topics, but
yeah,
and we're
yeah.
going to try to wrap it up before too long. It's almost 20 after 2. We got to be done before the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, we just have some time before the Super Bowl. Kickoff's not till 3:30,
Oh, really? Okay.
Pacific time. If people are wondering, on the East Coast, are wondering what we're doing. But yeah, I mean, I think we've covered off a lot of the stuff in the book that is, I think, of note. Um, there's lots of little kind of neat scenes in this
Yeah.
book, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's a collection of like we were talking about the Tralfamadorians, right? It's the whole book is this collection of moments, and some of them are really neat,
Yeah.
and some of them certainly stand out in contrast from the next scene or the next time Billy jumps in time and that kind of thing. So it's neat to once you get past the non-linearness of it, which, as I mentioned earlier, can make it a little more difficult to
Yeah.
access. But I think once you read a few chapters, once you get into the book a little bit, it starts to, and especially if you get into like the writing style and the humor and that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing, you really start to lean into it, and you start to look forward to, well, here's he going to end up next, right? What's he going to jump to, and how's he going to jump back, and what are these little snippets we're going to get. It reminds me a little bit. There's a book and a movie that I really do enjoy. Lots of people don't like it, but Cloud Atlas, it was a very kind
Oh,
of
wow.
similar thing where they kind of jump back and forth in space and time, and that kind of thing. And I think at first it's tough to access, but once you get into it, right, it really starts to work, and you start to see these things. I think, as the Tralfamadorians want you to,
Yeah.
you start to see them come together all together. So you're seeing it all at once, even though, we have to process things linearly as humans. But, you start to see these kind of more as that spaghetti string, or as that, series of moments happening all at once. And yeah, that's kind of a neat thing about the book, is that you do start to get more into that, frame of mind of going, okay, yeah, let's see all these moments.
Yeah.
Let's see what's happening
Yeah.
and how he's jumping around. And you start to lean into that a little bit more.
And I know for me, there were points where I found myself sort of remembering of those moments in my life where I'm doing a thing and I happen to hear a song or I smell a certain smell that reminds me of something from the past. And for like just a split second,
You're back
it
there.
almost feels like I'm back there.
Mhm.
And I think to an extent that might be kind of the feeling that Vonnegut is talking about as Billy Crystal is Billy Crystal.
Billy Crystal.
Billy Pilgrim. Let's cast Billy Crystal as Billy Pilgrim in the film adaptation. As Billy Pilgrim is sliding through time, is that you're suddenly back to something, and it can almost feel vivid.
Mhm.
Um, and that's sort of was my entryway into understanding what Billy was experiencing.
Yeah.
And I think that is a yeah.
All right.
I should always stop one sentence before I think I want to stop. Because too often I just end by going, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think books like this, it can be difficult to really. I mean, it makes you think of a bunch of different things
Yeah.
all at once, right? And it can be really difficult, I think, as we've proven here today, to express this multitude of thoughts in kind of one cohesive, monologue. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a great book. I think we got to encourage anyone who wants to read it to read this book.
Yeah.
Let alone for the anti-war message or what have you, but because it's humorous, it's extremely well written. It's kind of a look at the past in a sense. It's a book from the 60s that is covering, the war from, late 30s into the early 40s to mid 40s. So a different time, right? I mean, one of the things that did stand out to me when he talks about Times Square
You're
in
right.
New
Yeah, yeah,
York,
yeah. The
as
porn
you can
shops and
just
stuff.
walk around and there's sleazy books.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah.
you go there today and it's insane. Like
Yeah.
you can't park, you can hardly drive through it. It's crazy. And I haven't been there for a few years, but like much different, right?
Yeah.
Just how
Yeah.
the world was at that time versus now. There's some time capsule type things
Very
in
true.
the book as well,
Very true.
that I think are worth reading and
Although
experiencing.
there was, and again, I drew this from the graphic novel. I'm sure it was in the novel itself. There was a description before he headed out into New York to go to the radio station about how there was nothing on TV because like it was just after 8 o'clock and everything on TV was either detectives or silliness.
Yeah.
And I mean, I still feel like that describes a good chunk of
Yeah.
what's going on TV these days, especially like network TV. It's
Yeah.
either like a
There's
cop show or a
some
sitcom.
melodrama, procedural, or a
Exactly.
sitcom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the news, I guess. But
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
that's right. Well, that's why we have streaming services, I guess,
Exactly.
because that's still the formula.
And I do think this is a great gateway into Vonnegut as a writer, who
Mhm.
I think is one of the best American writers of the last 100 years. An incredible satirist, incredibly compassionate writer, um, and yeah, big fan.
The book, is it currently banned anywhere still?
Probably not. I don't know.
I mean, that maybe that's something we maybe should know, but it's certainly, if you can access a copy of it, it's worth the read. Like we said, it's not long; it's
Again,
a
most of
couple
the
hundred pages, right?
yeah, most of the banned books are banned from schools, and that will be it'll vary from state to state, from year to
Yeah.
year. It's
It's
gonna
probably still banned in some schools, I would imagine,
probably
right? People don't update those lists typically very frequently in
it's
the school boards.
oh, interesting. Oh my god, so many things are tied for 10th place. It's not on the list of the ALA's most frequently challenged books of 2022.
Well, it's
Probably
on the 100 of all
they
time or
probably
something, I
well
think.
the 100 of the last 10 years, right? 100 most banned and challenged books 2010 to 2019.
Hmm.
It's probably on here. Let's just do a Control F. So,
Well, there was one other interesting. I had my notes open here and just saw something here about the destruction of Dresden, which in the book, they mentioned that killed 130,000 people. Maybe we talked about this already, but Hiroshima,
yeah,
kill only 89,000 or something like that. So real, like, this event that Billy lived through and Vonnegut lived through, it was one of the most devastating, um, you know, campaigns against a civilian population in the history of war,
yes,
including Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the bombing of Tokyo,
yeah,
because Tokyo also had a similar attack. It was firebombed in the exact same kind of way, and the casualties were much less there. And on top of that, right, mentioning that it wasn't really a military stronghold or
no,
anything like that. The,
no,
the tactic was purely just, well, this is your seventh biggest city. We're gonna bomb it. It's maybe on a supply line, but other than that, there's no real strategic value from
it's
aside
more
from
just to show we
showing our
can.
might. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing, especially even in the book where they talk about, it's not very well known, but some people have found out about it. There's an implication that the military tried to kind of cover it up a little bit
yeah,
because it was, such a high civilian casualty versus military targets.
and it
And
is, I think, one that prior to, if not this book, then at least around this time, you're right. Most people didn't know about it. Wasn't talked
Mhm,
about. It was sort of like,
yeah,
well, we'll just. But that's, I mean, again, that's sort of any kind of, I think, country's propaganda. They're never going to want to admit to
yeah,
the things they did in the war. Not admit to, but necessarily. Let's not promote the things that we did in the war. We're maybe not entirely on the up and up.
that's right.
Let's just not mention that.
Yep.
It's not lying if you just don't talk about it.
And I don't think I actually ever even heard of Dresden until
No, me
reading
neither.
this
No,
book.
me neither.
There was another book that I think when I was a child that I uncovered, and I vaguely remember it, called Dresden Green,
Mm.
that I discovered after this book because I was curious about, like, well, why? Because one of the largest losses of civilian life in the war, and it's not talked about. I'd never heard about it, and I kind of looked into it a little bit more. But yeah, there's not a ton of information about this compared to a lot of other battles and things happening in the war, right? So yeah, it was one of those things kind of swept under the rug, or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just a huge loss of civilian life, and well, I mean, so it goes.
So it goes. Do you want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do next?
Well, let's do our ratings.
Oh yeah, let's
Yeah.
do. Well, I mean, my rating is going to be 5.
You're doing a 5
A
out of
5 out of 5.
Okay,
Tralfamadorian high fives.
okay.
5, 5,
You
5,
know, I
5,
don't
5.
like to give out fives, but I think maybe I might do a 4.75 Cadillac DeVille's
Holy shit!
out of 5. That's pretty.
That's maybe the highest.
That's
you've
pretty.
done.
I think that's the highest I've ever done. I mean, it's like I said, it's tough to get into, but once you get into this
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
it is funny. It talks about all sorts of subjects that are go from shallow to deep and back again, and it's just such a pleasure to read, right? And
It's so much.
you
It
feel
is.
like you
It is.
really,
It is weirdly fun to read,
yeah, you
in
feel
spite
like
of
you
how
get to
much
know not only the
fucking
time
tragedy there
frame,
is in it.
you get to know the time frame, you get to kind of take a look at the past, you get to know Billy, you get to know all these other characters actually fairly well, even the brief characters, aside maybe from Edgar Darby, get their kind of time in the sun and get
Yeah.
some explanation,
Yeah.
and the concepts around, we started this podcast essentially with a topic about time jumping and consciousness and this kind of stuff. There's some really interesting topics in here on top of the war message and
Yeah.
on top of everything else. So
Yeah.
it's it's packed full of stuff. So yeah, really, really great book. Top, almost the top of my rating scale there. Yeah, great book.
The only thing the book could have done better is suck you off, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, we'll see. I'm going to try out the graphic novel tonight. No,
There you go. I
yeah.
expect the pages to not be stuck together. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's talk about what we're up to next. I mean,
Although I was going to just throw out here because I just was briefly looking through the list of the most frequently challenged books of the last decade from 2010 to 2019. I see that 50 Shades of Grey is at number 8. So, like, maybe next year for February we can do a special Valentine's episode where we cover 50 Shades of Grey.
Sure. I mean, when you were talking about book club earlier, I had that thought flash through my mind of, well, most book clubs, like that was the book.
I have read it before.
I have unfortunately read it as well.
Have you?
Yeah.
What prompted you?
No, I read it? Maybe I read the first one and then watched some of the movies.
I think I've only read the first one, and I don't remember if I saw the first film or not. But it was, for me, it was just wanting to sort of be a part of the pop culture conversation because everybody was talking about it.
I think so. For me, I'm married, so my wife got it. I don't know if she even bought a copy or just kind of gravitated into her life from
I think
friends or other book clubs or things. But
there was a period where like every woman just had a copy of this book somehow.
Pretty much, yeah. There was a time in the history of the world where this book was just like, hey, are you a female? Like, here's this book.
Here you go. So Girls Club.
It gravitated into our lives somehow, and I mean, we like to kind of read books that each other has read. So
nice, yeah.
So I kind of read it that way, I think, or at least that's what I'm going to say publicly.
Sure. Fair enough.
But yeah, we could do that. But speaking of this February, we're still in February right now, so this counts. We are going to start reading a book by Toni Morrison. Yeah.
And that book is beloved.
Yeah. So I've read the foreword, and that's about it.
Okay.
Already,
I don't have a copy yet.
I cracked it open yesterday just to kind of take a look. I had some trouble kind of finding it.
Yeah, you were mentioning that.
I was looking online at like the chapters indigo, and there was the English version. I didn't find it on there, and went to the used bookstore, and then my wife was like, "Well, just check the physical." Indigo here in town, and they had a couple copies. So I'm not sure why it doesn't show up online as they actually have some stock of it, but
weird.
It was there. So I did get the copy of it and have kind of cracked into it. An interesting thing in the foreword is there was a real person that it's kind of loosely based on.
Oh
yeah. So that's kind of neat, but certainly seems like a really interesting story. I have a feeling it's going to be a lot more emotional than Billy Pilgrim's life.
Probably.
So we'll have to strap in for that. But yeah, certainly is going to be a little bit longer of a book as well. So I think we're looking at maybe doing three episodes around this one
Probably, yeah. 3
before
episodes
before we get to the
and then
live
a
one.
live, of
Yeah.
course.
But yeah, I'm excited. I mean, it's a little bit different. It's not about high school. It's not about Charlie's. Like we're
We're
real,
really changing
yeah,
things up.
we're changing things up here,
Yeah,
and
taking some personal challenges to
that's
do
right.
something new.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it, and yeah, I guess we'll see how timing works out, but it might be tough to get an episode in before the end of February. But
Yeah, I'm looking at the calendar right now, and just sort of based on the regular schedule of things, um, I'm thinking like, so today's the 11th. Ideally, I would like to record the first episode of Beloved on like the 25th, which has it out on March 3rd. So just barely after February.
okay.
Although I guess I could edit the shit out of it on the 25th and get it out like by the 29th,
Yeah, I mean, so those of you out there who have joined us in the room or that are going to listen to the
listening to this
recording
after.
of
Yeah.
this live episode, uh, by all means, message us and let us know if you want us to get this out early,
Yeah.
or if you've read it as well and have thoughts. Maybe keep it to the first 100 or so pages
Yeah.
as we get into the first episode. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you
And
on
actually,
this
yeah,
as well.
speaking of that, if there's anything, about this book that you want us to really think about as we go
Mhm.
into it, if you want to say like, hey, this sort of really spoke to me in the book, things that we should keep in mind as we go through it, we'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I think some challenges around this book is, it's about a mother.
Yeah.
It's around slavery.
Yeah.
So these are subjects that
And I've frequently seen it described as a horror novel as well.
yeah, I mean, it revolves around a ghost,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I mean, there's certainly subjects that we're not usually covering, or that from our perspective as I guess I'll speak for myself. I'll let everyone know I am a white male.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too.
It's stuff that can be difficult for us to examine, or to potentially empathize with in certain ways, or access some of the emotion around it. So
Certainly hard to relate to
yeah,
on a personal perspective, but
yeah, exactly,
I think that's the value of books like that, is to
exactly. Yeah,
open
open our
the
eyes to
door,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
to those sorts of experiences that we don't have, in order to help us better understand it. And I found that, um, way back, the first book that we covered was the autobiography of Malcolm X.
yeah, yeah.
And that was a really, really, really great read, and a really great opportunity to sort of look into that perspective. And I'm hoping Beloved will offer some of the same kind of material.
Yeah, I've never read any Toni Morrison.
Neither have I.
I mean, she's an insanely famous author.
Yeah, and
Uh,
she has 2 books on the frequently banned list,
yeah,
Beloved
yeah,
and The Bluest Eye.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, we're gonna try Beloved. I mean, it certainly seems like an interesting story.
Yep.
We'll do our best, but that's where we're looking to our listeners to help us out. If
Absolutely.
we get things wrong, or if there's things that we need to focus on, by all means, we love the comments, suggestions, all that kind of stuff.
And if you do want to get in touch with us, we have a whole new place to go for all of our
Yes.
links. I have put together an exciting thing called a link tree.
Yeah.
And it's just a bunch of links to all of our stuff. It's at Linktree, or linktr.ee/, blah 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 media.
Yeah. So yeah, it'll direct you to all sorts of pages for merchandise,
Yeah.
to buy us coffee, to get right into the Patreon stuff.
Or the website itself.
Yeah, the website itself, Facebook,
Facebook.
everywhere. Is the Discord on there as well?
No, I've forgotten about the Discord.
Okay.
Discord is
Yeah.
so unused. I
Yeah.
forgot about it
We're
completely.
we're not really on the Discord
Yeah.
frequently at
Yeah.
all, right? But yeah, I mean,
There's probably like one person in there who's messaging that I haven't even noticed. It's
we
like,
don't know.
hello, is there anybody here?
Just echoing in there.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, lots of ways to get in touch with us, lots of ways to provide your feedback, or to leave
Yeah.
your feedback. And yeah, we'll definitely try and address it for sure. And if there are other things that you think we should be looking at, I know I had a friend message me about, wasn't necessarily a banned book, but around, a Canadian TV show that kind of disappeared. W5 went off the air to little no
Was that
fanfare.
recently?
Yeah, fairly recently.
Interesting.
And so this investigative program that just kind of disappeared, and not exactly banned media, but there's things out there that are worth discussing, or that kind of thing. So by all means, message us. We'll talk about it potentially, or try and work it into something else.
Yeah.
And certainly, if it's around band media, then we'll might give us something to actually cover in a little more detail. But yeah, we appreciate all the messages and comments and that kind of stuff, and let us know if we're doing good or bad.
Exactly. Thanks for listening then. Until next time, I've been Todd Sullivan.
I've been Peter Ammon.
Then I guess I say until next time again, and then you do the...
Well, do you want to do it? I do it all the time, and
That's true.
you don't get to
That's
do
true.
it very
That's
often.
true.
So why don't you take it away here, Todd? What should we do?
We should... You know what, guys? Here's what I think you should do. Can we read a fucking book?